It's time for Backstage Chats with Women in Music, where the stories and voices of female music makers inspire women like you to be dreamers, to be rule breakers, and to unleash your inner rock star. Podcasting from Austin, Texas, the live music capital of the world, here's your host, Thea Wood.
Welcome to another episode of Backstage Chats with Women in Music. I'm your host, Thea Wood. Our next guest proves that not all who wander are lost. They may just take an unconventional path. She's Ace of Cups harmonica-playing singer-songwriter, true life Merry Prankster, and the yogi whom the stars call. Denise Kaufman, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Thea.
We are thrilled to have you here, and we just want to jump right in because there's so much to discuss. So we're going to start off with what we call the shakedown, a set of 6 questions that we ask all of our special guests. And are you ready to get started?
Absolutely.
All right, we'll start with our first question. Who was your first concert?
So if you're talking about a big concert, it was the Beatles at the Cow Palace in August of 1964. If you're talking about a little concert, I would say I was about 7 or 6 years old, and I heard Pete Seeger play at my local preschool in San Francisco and sat on his lap and heard him sing, "I Know an Old Lady Who Swallows a Fly."
I love it.
I could hear Pete Seeger a lot better than I could hear the Beatles at that big show. All I heard was screams.
Yes. And that's what my mother said when she went to see the Beatles, which was her first concert. She said she couldn't hear anything. It was just screaming. Let's see here. Next question. What was the first album you bought with your own money?
I bought 2 albums at the same time, and one of them was Seiji Ozawa, who was the conductor of the San Francisco Symphony, but it was a record he made with the Toronto Symphony, conducting a piece by a Japanese composer called November Steps. His name was Takemitsu, and it was this very interesting koto and percussion piece that I was really drawn to. And the other one was Ewan MacColl's album of Welsh mining ballads. I was really into folk music, and Ewan MacColl was married to Peggy Seeger, and I loved this music from Wales, and of course it was all in Welsh and I couldn't understand it, but I used to sing along and just make up what I thought were the closest sounds to the words.
How international.
Yeah, folk music kind of drew that out early in those days. If you were kind of into folk music, you were listening to, things from wherever you could find them. And he was a seminal person in the folk music scene.
Which artist or band is in heavy rotation on your playlists right now?
Well, I'm so working on the Ace of Cups music right now that we are the heaviest. And we're also working on both our live shows and our second album, which we're working to finish. So I'm working on those songs, but also family. My daughter's a singer, beautiful jazz singer. And she made an album with her dad, my ex, and my grandson is touring Europe right now with his band. So I'm listening to our family music because it makes me feel closer to everyone who's far away. I love the music. But I also listen to a lot of friends' albums, Steve Kimmock. These days I've been listening to Sam Cooke, a lot of Sam Cooke music. And the most recent song I just learned because I just wanted to be able to sing it was Sam Cooke's song, "The Hem of His Garment." About a woman who comes to be healed from Jesus, and she wants to just touch the hem of his garment and she'll be healed. And it's this beautiful song.
Which woman has had the most influence on your career?
That's an interesting question because my early mentors were men, and that was Ralph J. Gleason, and San Francisco rock critic and writer and founding editor of Downbeat magazine and Rolling Stone, and then our managers. So when I'm looking at what women had an influence, Buffy Sainte-Marie was one of the first women I ever heard who was both a songwriter and really strong. And I loved that because a lot of the women I listened to, like Joan Baez, they have beautiful voices. Politically, I really admired them, but they weren't songwriters and they didn't quite resonate with me the way Buffy Sainte-Marie did. There was a woman named Barbara Dane in the early folk music. There was a woman named Judy Henske. And then later, I would say Tina Turner had a big effect on me.
She had a big effect on me too.
And I went and she played during the early days of the Ace of Cups. She did a 1-month residence at the Hungry Eye in San Francisco with Ike and the Ikettes. And I went I would say I was probably there 5 nights a week for a month. And sometimes the club was empty. It was an odd venue for them. It was more of a kind of folk bohemian and also a stand-up comedy kind of club. And this was in 1967. Sometimes there would be like 4 or 6 people in the club, and I would be the one in the front row night after night. Later, of course, we learned what a brutal person Ike was, but, I couldn't tell that at the time. But she was so incredible, and so were the Ikeettes. And, I was sitting 6 feet away from her, and she was a big influence.
If you could have dinner with any woman, dead or alive, who would it be?
Well, the first person I thought of was Harriet Tubman.
Ooh.
I mean, what it must have taken to have the courage and vision and tenacity and, what to be who she was. But then when I really thought about it, I thought I'd like to have dinner with my mom, who's been gone now since 2000. And she was an activist and, had really transformed in the course of her life because she's a little English lady who came to America, ended up marrying my dad, and they ended up in San Francisco. And she was always open to new ideas. And, there was so much going on in the Bay Area during those days. And, she became an activist for everything from pro-choice to supporting the gay community to certainly civil rights. And she worked with a supporter of Delancey Street, which was one of the big programs there that worked with people with addiction and in prison records and things like that. And also she was active with Glide Memorial, which works with the homeless population in poverty. She was just loved the Ace of Cups, but she never got to see the Ace of Cups dissolved and we went our separate ways before what's come around in the last, 5 or 6 years. And if I could sit down with her now and show her our new album and let her hear these songs, that would be really thrilling for me. So I hope she's up somewhere enjoying what's going on with our music now.
I'm sure she is. I'm sure she's hearing it all and applauding loudly. Our last question is, what is one life goal you'd like to accomplish before climbing that golden stairway to heaven?
Well, my mom's name is Golda, by the way, so I'm going to say that stairway to heaven and to Golda. The things that are happening in life now for me are so far beyond what I could have imagined. I've really accomplished. I mean, if I, died tomorrow and climbed that stairway, I would already be so grateful. And I think especially this album coming out now is a huge accomplishment that I never thought would happen that has. I think really now what matters to me is to take the opportunity of every day and every opportunity that comes to us and every person who reaches out to us and just be the channel for the most good and the most benefit for the planet and to use whatever platform that we have now in the most beneficial way for humanity.
Amen, sister. Yeah. I agree with you. That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for answering those. So we've kind of wrapped up the shakedown now. And now we're going to get a little bit more into delving into Denise and your personal experiences and what's been going on. Most recently, the release of the Ace of Cups' first studio album. And like we said in the introduction, it's an astounding 24-track project, which is outstanding. And I really loved that you still treated it kind of like a concert in the fact that you had a live concert intro and a live concert outro.
Right.
That was fun and clever. And it led me to think, okay, again, I think it's kind of unconventional, which reminds me of Ace of Cups in general. But was the process of recording and bringing everybody together and how the public is receiving you, is this all going about how you would have expected, or were there some surprises along the way?
Well, first of all, I never expected, and none of us ever expected, that we would ever get to do this. So that's the first. I mean, it didn't happen in the 1960s, and it never happened in all of the intervening years that we got to go into a studio and record our music. So who would think it would happen 50 years later, right? So everything about that is unexpected and miraculous to us. That said, we're also not that experienced in studio work. I mean, I had done some recording in the intervening time and played bass. I'm a bass player too in the band. So I played bass on a number of people's albums and things, but I had, to go in with our own music, that's a whole different thing. And Dan Shea, our producer, is brilliant. And he really kind of took us gently and carefully and firmly and with great patience and love and devotion to the music, really moved us through this process. And
you had a lot of guests?
We had a lot of guests. And that was really fun. We only wanted guests who we were really directly connected with. Either we played with them in the old days or toured with them, or there was one degree of separation. For example, there was Steve Kimoxay, who is younger than we are. And we were gone before he arrived in Marin County and played with a lot of our mutual friends. He was 1 degree off. He played with a lot of our friends. So, Jerry Garcia's gone. And some of the other people that would have played on our album for sure if they were alive are gone. And so the people who played with them, who we feel connected with, they played on the album, and that was great. And then, Bobby Weir, Taj Mahal, Buffy St. Marie, and Peter Coyote, some of the people who lead sang on this project are longtime friends of ours.
Well, I think it's just great that the whole community got back together and supported each other, because I know that that's what the San Francisco Bay scene was like in the 60s. Everybody supported everyone. And I think that's the most successful way to build a scene. Rather than it being competition, it's collaboration, which is one of our values as a foundation. It kind of also had a little bit of a flair for me. I had to smile because I remember the Blues Brothers movie where they ran around all over the country finding all of their band members saying, we're putting the band back together. And it was such a, you know what I mean? And it was such a sort of deal. And I think it's kind of fun that your team was able to pull that all together, and especially for such a big project.
Right. And we have another double album coming out in a year. So and that album is I would say it's 3/4 done. So we've been recording, and it started out, we were going to record 12 songs, and then it became 16, and then it became 21. And our amazing record label, George Bear Wallace is the president of High Moon Records. Every time we'd say, well, we're trying to decide whether we should do Simplicity or Gemini. And he goes, well, you have to do them both. I said, well, so that's how it grew and grew and grew, and it's still kind of growing. So we'll have another double album out in, a year to 18 months.
Well, I guess that's
we have a lot of music.
Worth of songs. All right. Speaking of Jerry Garcia having passed, and he was later on, obviously, in life, but, you and the other ladies in the band had all experienced losses of people who were young. Jimi Hendrix, Pigpen, Janis Joplin. When you were a young woman, how did you handle that, or how did that affect you?
Well, it was really sad. I mean, one of the closest people we lost was also Michael Bloomfield, because the Electric Flag band was put together rehearsing in our house, and those guys were mentors of ours. And so when Michael died, actually I was on the Nepali coast of Kauai with Bobby Weir at the time. And I had heard the news of Michael passing, and you just look up in the stars and in the heavens and just go, oh no, this is just so sad and such a loss. And through the years, if you've lost friends in that way, you can't help but wonder, what would Jimmy be playing now? Where would Janis be now? Where would Jerry be now? And the tragedy of those substances. And as there's more and more information coming out in the neuroscience of this, how the way certain people are so much more susceptible just because of their own neuroreceptors, not to mention their own psychological history, to these substances. And I just wish there was more knowledge and understanding that could have diverted those things from happening and offered more options to some of those amazing musicians.
Well, in a long time, no research was done because everything was just considered so off the table. Like, this is bad or it's illegal. And at the same time, it didn't mean that people were stopping the usage of drugs or alcohol. It just became underground. And I think nowadays we're seeing more progress in those areas, and I hope it continues. You too were somebody who was involved in the drug counterculture. In fact, I believe your nickname was Merry Microgram, which
that's me.
You earned that when you joined the Merry Pranksters. Am I right?
That's true.
And you were just a teenager at that time, right?
I was 18.
Mm-hmm. And your parents, showing obvious concern, decided it would be a good idea to admit you into the Mount Zion Hospital. And I'm just kind of curious, how did that stay affect your relationship with drugs and music?
Well, I was on the bus for more than a year before that happened, and I had been taking LSD before that. So what happened was LSD started to get some really bad publicity. When I started taking it, it wasn't even illegal.
Right.
And then it was such a life-changing spiritual experience for me that I really was exploring the consciousness that it opened, as were a lot of the other pranksters and the dead. And so, by a year and a half later, there was so much bad publicity about acid that my parents not so much from what was actually happening, but their fears about what might be happening tricked me into going to this hospital. And it was a psych ward. That's not what they told me it was going to be, but it was. And I actually had to agree to stay because they couldn't legally keep me. But the laws were at that time, if you were under 21, your parents could go to court and try and get you admitted to a state mental hospital. I don't think they would have done that, but I kind of got that threat through the hospital. Like, you should stay here. So they don't do that. So,
Right.
So I said, okay, I'll stay, as I knew I didn't want to go that route.
And didn't Ken Casey say he was going to try and come and bust you out?
Yeah, he came to the hospital, and thought it was sort of a one flew over the cuckoo's nest thing. And he was going to bust me out, and he was going to send the Hells Angels to get me out. And I was like, oh, but by then I had agreed to stay and do some family therapy and kind of see if I could kind of calm things down in the family zone. And by then, my deal with the hospital was that I had to have a job and I had to have saved first and last month's rent to get out, so I wouldn't be dependent on my parents at that point.
Oh.
And it seemed reasonable. And my friend and mentor, Ralph J. Gleason, helped me get a job at Fantasy Records. At the time, it was owned by Max Weiss. He was the senior partner and was over in the Mission District in San Francisco on Treat Street. And so I would leave the hospital every day and go on the bus and go to my job at Fantasy Records. And then I'd come back and sleep there at night. And I could go out and hear music if I wanted to. I just had to sign out and sign in. So it wasn't like I was just in there full time. And I worked at Fantasy, and John Fogerty was the only other young employee there. And he worked in the record packing room, sending out LPs. And I ran the office. And his band was Creedence Clearwater. I mean, later, at the time, it was called the Gollywogs. So I stayed at that point out of this agreement that I made. And while I was in the hospital, a woman who was the occupational therapist there said, you should go up and meet this guy on the top floor. Oh, and by the way, I had by then in the room a couple of amps full. I had a piano and the keyboard in there. I had my guitars in there. I had totally renovated this room in the hospital to be a total hippie den. And so, anybody who came in there with beads hanging everywhere. So this occupational therapist said, you should meet this guy on the top floor. And I went up to meet him. And he was Ambrose Hollingsworth, who had managed Quicksilver Messenger Service and had been in a terrible car accident and was recovering his capacities after becoming a paraplegic.
Right.
And he was a poet and mystic. And we started he wrote poems, and I started setting his poems to music. And it was while I was still in the hospital is when I went out to a party on New Year's Eve of 1966 to 1967 and met Mary Ellen Simpson playing guitar in a bedroom upstairs at Blue Cheer's house. And she invited me to come over and meet some women that she was playing with. And so if I hadn't been in the hospital, I don't know that any of these things would have happened. And my life sort of has that energy sometimes, think something that seems to be a limitation is almost often a doorway.
Right.
And so I met the Aesopus while I was still in the hospital. Then I brought them all to meet Ambrose, and Ambrose asked to be our first manager and showed us the tarot card. That was our name. That all happened while I was in the hospital.
That is just such an incredible story.
Right.
I mean, and inspirational, especially for people who may be afraid to make a move like that, if they feel they need professional help. I mean, you just don't know what's going to come of it. And I don't know, it gives you that hope that, yes, you come out on the other side and all kinds of amazing things can happen.
And the other thing about LSD at that time, and if you read, I'm just in the middle of Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, which is a really interesting history and current exploration of the world of psychedelica and drug policy too. And, that's during the Vietnam War, and people were getting drafted, and the government knew, that if people took LSD, they would not go to war.
Right.
And that was, so, the demonization of psychedelics had a lot to do with the mind control that the government wanted, because the government did the first experiments with those substances. And, the first experiments, that's how Kesey got turned on to psychedelics, was a government program.
That's right.
So the fact that psychedelics, which really showed a lot of promise in so many ways in early legal experimentation, got shut down, that was a political move. That was, you want to just keep people so you can just draft them and send them off to war. And if their consciousness expands, they're not going to happily do that,
And aside from the LSD, you started looking into other forms of conscious expansion. And
Exactly.
one of those through meditation and eventually through yoga. And I really do want to touch on that because right now you're kind of a superstar in the yoga field. You've been doing this for decades. You've become an instructor. You've had celebrity clients such as Madonna and Jane Fonda come in. Was this something that you saw as an outcome of your studies, or did it happen unexpectedly?
My mother practiced yoga, and there were yoga books around my house growing up. And so the physical parts, I would look at a picture in a book and go, I can do that, and put my foot here or my arm there or twist into some shape. So that was kind of always a fun little party game for me. I found a meditation teacher when I was 15 who lived in my neighborhood, eventually became very well known and has the big Hindu temple on Kauai. He's now passed away, but I used to go down and meet with him and he would show me practices. So that was always there for me, and I studied sitar during the Ace of Cups with Nikhil Banerjee. I studied Indian music with a really wonderful teacher during the Ace of Cups years and played sitar for a while in the Ace of Cups. So all of that was there for me from when I kind of for as long as I can remember. But I think, at the end of my really active LSD period, I was really looking for how do we access that kind of consciousness with just ourselves so that it doesn't wear off or you don't come down and you're just able to dwell in that expansion. So that's really led me deeper into yoga. But it was always a personal practice. When I moved to LA, which was in 1983, to go to music school, because I had transferred sort of from guitar to bass and I just wanted to jumpstart my bass playing and move it up faster. So I just started practicing yoga at a local place because I had moved from Kauai where I surfed every day and I couldn't do that in LA, living in Hollywood, going to school. And so because a musician's institute is like in deep Hollywood. So I was like, okay, I need to find something I can do every day so I feel physical, not just sit in a little cubicle with a bass. So I started going to Bikram's yoga classes, which were close by, relatively for LA. And pretty soon Bikram asked me to start teaching there. So that happened. And then when he would get calls to do privates with people, which he didn't do. He said, you have to go up and work with Quincy Jones. He wants a private. And I don't do that. So he just sort of started directing me to work with people. And I never set out to do that. And, later I was teaching Ashtanga yoga, with Madonna and with Jane Fonda and people like that. And, I never advertised or anything. It was just people word of mouth kind of found out. And then, music was on the back burner. I had a teenage daughter at the time and I didn't want to be out at night and I couldn't quite figure out how to gig or travel and be a good mom as I was a single mom.
Right.
And so yoga teaching really helped because I could do it during the day while she was in school and I could be home in the evenings with her.
Right. And when you worked with these other women who are in the entertainment industry and obviously a very male-dominated industry, did y'all get a chance to swap some stories?
Yes. Yeah. I had really wonderful talks with Madonna because I worked with her over, a couple of years, and also with Jane. And, with Madonna, she's such a amazing, disciplined, focused person.
I get that from her.
Yeah. I worked with her 3 days a week, basically for a couple of years. And she was never late. Mm-hmm. And at one time, she was a few minutes late, and it was the night that her friend Versace, had been killed.
Right.
But she would be up all night working on her album. That time she was working on the Ray of Light album. And so I was, taught her some Sanskrit and translated some things for her so she could do the Ashtanga chant on her album. And she'd be up, late into the night recording, and she'd be there to do her yoga practice in the morning. She was amazing.
And I love to hear again about the collaboration.
Right.
It's, again, it's the women helping the women. Your life, you've had an unconventional path, and a lot of other women may be out there wanting to do an unconventional path, and they're getting a lot of negative feedback to that, or being told that they have no direction or they don't know what they're doing. Would you have advice for women who are trying to make a change or want to make a change that others may think is crazy or off the charts?
I think it's really important to keep in your life the things that rock your soul. And those things may or may not be your livelihood. We still don't know if our music will, we're touring this summer, but, then we're really doing that a lot with the support of our record label. We wouldn't be able to do it otherwise. But I think whatever you need to do to pay the bills and, keep the roof over your head or whatever those things you need to do that. But also in there, you want to nourish that part of you that loves something, whatever that is. And don't put it so far in the back burner that you think, well, if I can't do it for a living, I can't even focus on it. I can't bring it into my life. And I think that's really important to, first of all, honor those things that rock your soul.
Yes.
And know that, there's a lot, some people that can't, just like, I don't know, I can't find anything, so it's like finding that place in yourself. What is it that I love to do? And, it could be walking in nature. It could be making some ceramics. It could be, writing a poem, or it could be, drumming in a drum circle, whatever those things are. And I think that's a huge playground of what's possible. You want to find those things and then just include them in your life. And there may be times where you don't get to do it as much as you want or devote as much as you want to it. But then, also you want to say, look, I have the choice tonight of watching a TV show or, pulling out that banjo that I want to learn. Put it on the front burner enough to just don't put it in the closet, just pull it out and just go, I'm going to, half an hour a day in on that thing that I love. I think in our lives, with the Ace of Cups, we all kept playing music, and it wasn't always on the front burner. And a lot of times we had to do other things to pay the bills, but we kept playing. And then things came around with these opportunities that if we hadn't nourished those seeds and nourished those little plants and those little blossoms of what we loved, I don't know what would have happened. So that's my advice, is nourish that place inside you, no matter, and don't let anybody dissuade you from that.
We all appreciate those words of wisdom. And I think a lot of us need to feel the confidence to be able to practice that more. And, it's fun because here you are again, about 50 years after your heyday, and you've recorded an album, you're recording a second album, and you're getting ready to go on tour, which again, you don't hear this very often about women who are in their, 60s, 70s and 80s.
Our drummer is 75.
I mean, that's incredible. That's incredible. She is amazing. All of you are so amazing. Well, what we're going to do is in our show notes on our website, backstagechats.com, we're going to have links to your tour dates and to your albums and to your playlists and everything else so that people get all of the information they could possibly want for supporting the band Ace of Cups and supporting you, Denise. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today and sharing your stories. And like I keep saying, your unconventional path. And we do really, really wish you the best in all of your upcoming endeavors.
Thank you so much, Thea. Thanks for all the work you do to elevate women and connect us, because that's really powerful and potent, especially in these times.
Yes, indeed it is, especially in these times. And what I like to end each show with is that the reason we love ladies like you is because you remind us to be dreamers, to be rule breakers, and to unleash our inner rock star. Thank you again so much for showing up, and we will keep our eyes out for you on tour. And good luck to you and the ladies on everything that you have coming up in the next year.
Thank you so much.
Take care, and that's a wrap.
Hit the subscribe button and never miss an episode of Backstage Chats with Women in Music. This podcast is a production of the Backstage Chats Foundation, a non-profit that is on a mission to eliminate gender disparity in the music industry by amplifying the voices and careers of women in music. You can make a difference by donating to the cause. Visit backstagechats.com and click the donate button today.